Hello. This is a way of explaining the homework assignment um, coming up, or the homework assignments for the end of the class. I was reading an article today or an opinion piece in the New York Times by Paul Krugman, where he talks about a study a few years ago by Autor and some other economists, where they said that um, although computers are supposedly going to come around to take away lower wage jobs by doing repetitive tasks, that's actually not what's happening. That what's happening is that many of the lower wage jobs aren't computerized. I mean, so if you're a janitor, for example, it's not that a computer necessarily is going to be able to come and do all of the things that you do. He said this piece suggests that it's routine tasks that are, over and over again, and many of those are manual labor jobs, but quite a number of them within what we would have considered a while back the middle class, and then also white collar jobs, which is the surprising part. That if you're doing mental work, but that it's repetitive mental work, and there are examples in the piece. By the way, it's called Dollars and Degrees, I think, and it's a March 7th editorial from Paul Krugman in the New York Times, and that will link to the original study. But if you're doing some types of white collar work where you're just doing repetitive tasks, or where there's a set of rules that you follow pretty specifically in order to complete your task, those types of jobs are also being computerized or being taken over by technology. And those jobs are going away, and many of those fields may go away. For me, one of these things would be like what it is to be a travel agent. Certainly what it was to be a travel agent 30 years ago meant you had a person that sort of carried you through a process. But the industry has changed massively, and there's still a role for that sort of personalized service and somebody who knows the area and knows what they're doing and perhaps has traveled to some of the places that you're going to. But it's a lessened role, and you don't know how that industry is gonna go in terms of their labor needs. So one of the reasons I say that is to say that the skill set that you should be developing, perhaps, is one that goes away from rule following, routine tasks. These are the very types of tasks that right now colleges may not be teaching very well. There is a study or a book by Richard Arum called, I think, Academia Adrift. I'll put a link up on the site. It's Richard Arum, and I think the book is being published in 2011. But what they're going to say is that the sort of critical thinking skills, the writing skills, are just not getting through, and people are not developing those skills. Instead, what they're doing is they're accumulating credits with the idea that a college degree is going to bring them a job at some point. And if this were 1963, that would be true, but it's not necessarily true at the moment. What needs to happen is a greater emphasis on being able to organize your own thoughts, your own way of going through something, finding a way to come up with new insights and hypotheses and things like that. Very difficult for the computers, for the technology to come and take those jobs away. But you're seeing a great funneling out of the middle of both the manual, repetitive jobs, and if you look at the some of what's involved in the fight against unions in Wisconsin currently, you'll see this going on. And also in the same fight, the sort of routine cognitive tasks that are being phased out. I say all this, I bring this up to say that if you are in charge of your education and you are in this for some economic stability, that a simple focus on credit accumulation and getting a credential may not be as economically helpful as you might have hoped. And let me suggest that in many ways this class is not a help, is not the help it should be. There is very little money in taking exams. Frankly, there's very little money in following someone else's rules that they set out, or being told what it is that's important in some text so that you can then take a test that they set up. There's very few jobs that are going to pay you that much money, enough to live in the Bay Area, where, by the way, one study has it that a family of four's poverty level would be $54,000 a year take home. So really, to be above the poverty level, you need to be at about maybe $80,000 in gross income, $70,000 in gross income, maybe for a family of four, to be paid that amount of money. There's just not that many routine things that are going to continue to pay like that. Now, it's true that you could have these type of jobs as you're coming up in the 70s and the 80s, and that generation should be okay. But this is a slightly different generation that competes globally, and I think it's going to be a little bit different. So I say all that to say this: I don't think there's very much money in developing your ability to take exams, certainly not multiple choice exams. What is odd to me, given all this, is how little effort is put forth in teaching what the work is of particular fields in college. So, for example, I have students that think if you're in sociology, you're in sociology to teach, which is certainly an outcome, and here I am. And so many of my colleagues, especially at Foothill and when I taught at De Anza a little bit more, really a strong desire, I think, to be teachers. And so there's no doubt that that is a way to take it. But the work of sociology is analytical work. It is the work of doing sociological analysis. And it is the contributions in that field that are sociology. In other words, you could have a test after this class, or perhaps for those of you in this position where a parent is paying your tuition, and they say, okay, you've had a sociology class, what is sociology? And you'll think to yourself, oh boy, I don't have that. By the way, in case it comes up, here's a definition. Sociology is the study of social order. That may shut them up. The truth is that sociologists don't agree about these definitions. And that at no point do you walk around as a sociologist thinking, oh no, I don't have a definition of sociology. What shall I do? I mean, it's very seldom you need definitions except on tests in college. Sociology is, by and large, analytical work done on some sort of empirical data. And so I'd like to give you at least a little taste before you leave of what the work is. And it's fairly clear, I suspect by now, that I don't like defining things very much. I haven't spent a lot of time wanting to say what love is. Maybe it's time. I think it is time. I think time you spend with people, they bleed into you and grow into you. There was a case where, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Oliver Sacks. I'd have to go back and see. But they come to this guy who has trouble leaving his table in his kitchen. His wife had died, and ever since then he seemed to be stuck at the table. As he tells the story, what got him away from that table every day was his wife's, pardon the sexism of this, nagging. She would say to him, how do you sit there when the grass looks like that? And don't you know the light went out, and she would say things to him, and he would put his paper down, or he would stop listening to the ball game on the radio, and he would move. There are ways in which she really acted as his legs, his impetus, his motivation. When she passed, he was not whole. They had been married 50 years. He was not going to be whole. Now, that may sound more like codependence than love to some people. But for me, it's the time spent with somebody that makes it where you start to use the words that they use and they use the words that you use. And you start eating the same ways and tending towards the same things. That for me is love. It's a function of time. By the way, I think it's vastly overrated compared to like. I think love can last a long time. I think in that way, because time and love go together, I think love is easy. I think what's hard is liking people. You can love them, but do you like them? You can love them, but, do you really like them? All right. So anyway, that was a worthless addition, which I hope to be able to cut out in future things. So the analytical work goes like this. When we see some thing going on in the world, the question becomes, can we put that in perspective, in a sociological perspective? This may mean connecting this event to other events, certainly in the way that histories are drawn up so that you can get sort of a unique trace of events that sort of connect to each other over time. So with the things going on in Wisconsin, it may bring up the labor history. And history is a big part of some sociological analysis. We might also do, it might send us into collecting data. And so some event, again, like using Wisconsin as an example, you might find sociologists going there to do an ethnography of the people who are protesting, or the people in Wisconsin generally, or, polling data and trying to get public opinions. This is also part of sociology. The other way, and the way that I'm going to show you, is connecting particular events to theoretical positions. And the idea there is if you can get a few elements of an event that connect to a theoretical position, this allows you to sort of give a hypothesis of what else might be going on that you can't yet see. It might give you a sense to read what direction things might go and what may cause them to break one way or another way. This can actually be of value to people, but I'll have to make that case later. So the first part of this assignment is to go listen to the theory lectures. In the law class, these will mostly be about social control. And then what I'll do is I'll have you take elements of what will be called Durkheimian theory or functional theory and look at particular events. And then I'll have you look at conflict theory or Marxism and look at particular events. And all I'm going to ask you to do is to make a couple of connections between the terms I'm talking about in the theory lectures to the specific events that are going on here at the time. I just need you to do a taste. I'm not asking for a full analysis, but that's the sort of thing we're going to do. What sociologists begin to do is look for patterns of events, patterns of behaviors. Most social scientists do this in one form or another. Here what we're going to do is try and see if we can fit the specific events or the specific data and explain it using the theory. So obviously more about this coming.